Rebekah Roth here again, and I'm going to give you something to think about this time. Since we found out from customer service agents who printed out the real passenger manifests that there were no Arabs on the planes, we have to think about, well, what else could have been going on? We might want to take a look for clues that something else was really going on those 4 planes that day. Well, I found a list several years ago, and I can't believe it, but I have carried this list around with me for at least a decade. It's a list of last-minute passengers and crew members. I don't know why I kept it. Now, I'm not saying that these people were involved, but I am looking at who changed their plans at the last minute, say within 24 hours or less of the departure of those morning flights on September 11th. Who was scheduled to fly the day before or the day afterwards? And as part of their story, I learned that they had changed their plans for one reason or the other, and they ended up on those flights. For example, on Flight 11, there were at least 13 last-minute passengers out of 76 passengers. They changed all their travel plans for one reason or the other. On United 175, there were only 6 last-minute passengers, and one of them was a small child traveling with his parents. Not too suspicious and pretty typical. On Flight 77, only 5 of the 53 passengers were last minute. Pretty typical. But on United Flight 93, something very unusual happened. 15 of the 33 passengers were last minute. And of those 15, 6 of them made phone calls from the plane. And of those 15, one at least was a bodybuilder, one was a rugby player, one was a college judo champion, and at least 2 were college athletes, big time. None of the phone callers described the hijackers by their ethnicity except for the Jewish judo champion who claimed the hijackers were Iranian. Well, they weren't there, so we can kind of put 2 and 2 together. Many of the callers from Flight 93 didn't even say they were being hijacked or had been hijacked, indicating to me that the planes indeed were on the ground. None of them mentioned the number of hijackers. We probably do have to ask, if there were no Arab hijackers, is it possible that others were playing a role of a hijacker or some such thing? Could it be possible that several of the crew members and the passengers were somehow involved? What could have really been going on those planes? Remember, Betty was so confused. She didn't know if they were being hijacked or what. But we have to stick to the evidence. And the first thing we have to stick to is that there were no Arabs on the planes. Remember, on Flight 11, the flight attendant at first claimed 2 things. One of the hijackers spoke good English, and one of them was in seat 9B. Now, also on my list, I've been carrying around probably for at least a decade, there's something else noted there. There was a very unusual number of crew members who were also put on the flights at the last minute. Most of them were notified the afternoon of the 10th or the morning of the 11th. Highly unusual. On Flight 11, 7 of the 9 flight attendants were a last-minute crew. Both of the pilots, Oganowski and McGinnis, were also. Oganowski received a phone call on the afternoon of the 10th, according to his wife. And from what it sounds like, whoever called him said he just couldn't refuse to go. Even though he had a huge event planned on his farm that included the Department of Agriculture coming in from Washington, D.C., and guests even coming from Japan on the date of the 11th. Couldn't refuse this trip for some reason. On United 175, 5 of the 7 flight attendants were not originally scheduled crew. I've not found a reliable information source on the 2 pilots. It's possible one or two may have been. I just haven't found it. On Flight 77, the best I can find, 4 out of 4 flight attendants were last-minute crew. The most reliable information that I could find, that at least the captain on Flight 77 possibly changed his schedule to be on that flight to attend a baseball game and to get home the following day for his birthday. So what else is kind of fascinating on that, as I kept looking throughout the years, is the co-pilot on Flight 77. Well, his father was a CIA agent for many years, and I discovered that when I stumbled upon his father's obituary about 10 years after 9/11. I thought, well, that's kind of a coinky-dink right there. At least 4 of the 5 flight attendants were last-minute crew, and at least one of the pilots was not originally scheduled to be on that plane. So what are you going to say? Several years ago, I found an article on cnet.com, and this was written right after 9/11, September 14th, 2001. The article was titled, "Tech World Mourns the Loss of Employees." There were 15 tech companies listed, and let me tell you what they were, because you'll maybe make some sense to you. Cisco, Oracle, that was Todd Beamer, Let's Roll, and his boss, Larry Ellison, you'll remember who he is now, the CEO, who knew about the Let's Roll. Applied Materials, that was the Israeli woman on Flight 175. Compaq Computer, Akamai, that was Daniel Lewin in 9B, and MRV Communications, that was 9A on Flight 11. Metrocall from Flight 77 had an employee. BEA Systems, that was Ed Felt calling from a lavatory on a cell phone, Flight 93. Vividence was the Jewish judo champion on Flight 93. 3Com was Mark Bingham, Flight 93. E-Logic had 2 people on Flight 11. Raytheon had 3 on 11 and 77. Sun Microsystems had someone on. Next Wave was Barbara Olson. Of those techies, 9 of them were on Flight 11. And this one article, 2 were on 175, 4 were on Flight 77, 4 were on Flight 93. And at quick glance, at least 7 of the 15 techies from that article were Jewish. 5 of them made history with their phone calls from the planes. Remember now, if there were no Arabs on the real passenger flight manifest, I'm not saying these people were involved, but I found it coincidental that they were all listed in this magazine a couple days later. Were they playing the role of a hijacker? Remember, Amy Sweeney and Betty Young said this, not me. They did, that the passengers that were hijackers were in 9A and B on Flight 11. So is it possible that some of these last-minute people were somehow involved? It's possible. I mean, at this point, from the things I found, I can just say anything is possible. I'm not saying that they were, but we do know that the Arabs weren't there, so somebody was playing a role somehow, somewhere along the line. So that'll give you something to think about.